The house on the coast had once been a sanctuary for noise. Ocean winds had swept in through lace curtains, mixing with piano chords, laughter, hurried footsteps, and the occasional clatter of wine glasses on marble. But now, it was silent. Except, sometimes, when the sun dipped low and the sky turned the color of ripe peaches, she would press play. The CD whirred softly in the old Sony stereo, the same clunky machine from the early 2000s, and then came that voice. Soft, trembling, not quite in tune. Not professional. But earnest. Nicole Kidman sat very still on the worn velvet chaise longue, barefoot and shivering despite the warmth. Her fingers rested over her lips, as if holding a memory still in her mouth. And then. If you're not the one, then why does my heart tell me that I am? Daniel Bedingfield's heartfelt song spun into the room with all the weight it had carried over 2 decades ago. She hadn't changed CDs in years. She never listened to anything else when she was alone. Which, these days, she often was. To anyone else, it might seem eccentric. Clinging. Nostalgic at best. But for Nicole, it was the last honest tether to something, someone, that had almost rewritten the shape of her life. Los Angeles, 2003. There's too much history in a glance, particularly in Hollywood, a city that feeds on the heat of potential and spits out the bones of maybes. But when Nicole had met Jonathan Avery, the young Australian composer still grinding out tracks in anonymous post-production studios, there had been no spotlight, no red carpets. Just a feeling. He had been assigned as a musical consultant for a lesser-known drama Nicole had chosen precisely because it wasn't blockbustering. She wanted quiet then. After the storm of a marriage that had ended, publicly, like a symphony in collapse. After the headlines. After the flashing bulbs and tears and appearances on talk shows with practiced dignity. Jonathan had been quiet too. Observant. The kind of man who asked sincere questions and listened like the answers mattered more than his next comment. And one afternoon, late in the editing suite, he handed her a CD. Burnt. Labeled in his looping, almost childlike scrawl, just songs. It's nothing commercial, he said. Just demos. Things I wrote, before I got tired of being rejected by record labels. You said you couldn't sleep. Nicole had taken the CD with a small thanks, tucking it into her leather tote the way one does with something that won't last beyond the cab ride home. But that night she had played it. Twice. The third track was a cover, If You're Not the One, recorded on a single cheap mic, probably in his studio above the pizza joint on Fairfax. The room breathed in the recording, you could hear the gentle clink of a spoon in a mug halfway through, or maybe the door to the balcony slamming softly. But his voice, it was vulnerable in a way you couldn't fake. Not in this town. And something in her heart, calloused from tabloids and betrayals, cracked slightly open. Over time, their weekend walks turned into weekday cooking. Conversations about music became late-night confessions. In a world obsessed with power couples and designer gowns, Nicole loved the simplicity of it. Jonathan didn't ask about premieres. He didn't care who she sat next to at Golden Globes. He made music for the sake of it, not for accolades. One dusk, in the kitchen of her rented Malibu beach house, Jonathan sang that same song again, live this time, no mic, no polish. He sang it for her. She leaned against the sink, laughing, teary-eyed. When you sing that, she whispered, I don't feel famous. I feel real. He nodded slowly, then said. You are real. You just forgot. But Hollywood waits for no one. The roles came again, riskier, meatier roles. Directors called her revived, emotional rocket fuel, the kind of muse they'd kill for. And with resurgence, came distance. Not out of cruelty, but by nature. Jonathan remained. For a while. He chose to stay small. Indie gigs, underground film scores, a few workshops with teenagers who played out-of-tune violins but had heart. Nicole loved him for it. Yet, as her star rose again, she became harder to reach, emotionally, chronologically, even geographically. There were missed calls. Letters that came late. Moments retracted like wings folding back into a bird too scared to fly. Until one day, he left a note on the fridge, under the magnet shaped like Australia. I'll never stop loving you. But I can't keep existing in the negative space of your life. J. She never found him again. Never saw him on red carpets or soundtrack credits. He folded back into the world quietly, like a song that ends before you're ready. Present day, 2025. The CD still plays. She had its surface resurfaced by a specialist in downtown LA once, just before they stopped making those machines entirely. Her daughters joke about it. Mom's vintage ritual. She lets them laugh. Let the world move on. But in those rare moments where the sun slants golden and the waves slap the stones outside just so, Nicole sits back, closes her eyes, and listens. It's not about regret, not entirely. It's about how sometimes the truest parts of us are captured not in the award speeches or magazine covers, but in burned CDs, silent kitchens, unfinished hummed melodies. Moments when someone saw us, really saw us, and didn't ask us to perform. Her name is known in every corner of the world. But in that one song, sung by a man whose face no one remembers, she is simply Nicole. There's something about music, the way it lingers long after memory fades. Nicole had performed on stage, in front of cameras, in ball gowns and wigs and prosthetics that transformed her into queens, addicts, writers, courtesans, grief-stricken mothers. But in her deepest solitude, it wasn't applause she missed. It was presence. And no one, not even those who claimed to love her most, had ever been able to close the distance between her and her image, except Jonathan. That CD, now scratched and dulled like a relic from another life, was more than a collection of demo songs. It was a timestamp, a window into a fleeting version of herself that even fame couldn't preserve. A winter in Vienna. It was a role she nearly turned down. A tense psychological period drama, filmed in the slush and frost of a moody Austrian winter. The kind of set that made you question whether you were acting or simply unraveling. By chance or divine cruelty, Nicole stumbled upon a face she hadn't expected. There, sitting 2 rows back during a dress rehearsal of the Viennese Philharmonic, was Jonathan Avery. Hair longer. Beard flecked with gray. Thicker glasses. But unmistakable. He was alone. Quiet. Still. Her heart stuttered. After 20 years of whispers, assumptions, and one vintage CD, the ghost was not a ghost at all. He didn't see her. Not then. But that night, after the show, she waited near the musician's exit. A wool coat wrapped around her slender frame, her identity hidden under a knit cap. She stood against a lamppost, rehearsing 1,000 conversations in her head. And then, there he was. Light pooled around him, and in the haze of falling snow, time bent. "Jonathan," she said, barely more than a breath. He stopped. Froze. Looked into her eyes like pages were flipping open in his mind. One word, not even a greeting. Nicole. Silence filled the gap between them. Not cold. Not warm. Just truth. She smiled, lips trembling. "You look peaceful." He laughed once, dry. "That's new. Most people say old. Older isn't worse. Just different." He shoved his hands into his coat pockets. "What brings you to Vienna?" "Apart from destiny," she teased. He raised an eyebrow. "You still dramatic, then? You still avoiding the world?" "I'm living in it. Just differently." That night, they had tea in a small bookshop turned cafe. No interviews. No makeup trailers. Just porcelain cups clinking and old jazz on scratchy speakers. She didn't ask where he'd been. He didn't ask why she never responded. Some things they both knew without needing words. Jonathan, it turned out, lived quietly above an old music school. Taught composition. Wrote for orchestras, sometimes anonymously. Had a cat named Sati. Still didn't have social media. When she asked if he still played that CD, their CD, he shrugged. I only made one copy. Gave it to you, he said. Nicole froze. You didn't keep a backup. He blinked. Why would I? And perhaps that was the moment she finally understood the weight of it. The CD wasn't a gift, it was surrender. Love, interrupted. They didn't kiss that night. Or the next. Their reunion wasn't fiery or cinematic. It was quiet. Careful. Like healing scar tissue that still remembers pain every time it stretches. She stayed in Vienna 2 weeks longer than scheduled. They took evening walks by the river. He played her new music on an old upright piano. They took Polaroids that she kept tucked inside the CD's jewel case. But she had to leave. There was a premiere in Tokyo. A reshoot in London. Life pulled like relentless gravity. Before boarding the plane, she pressed something into his hand. The CD. I want you to have it, she said. I've already memorized it note for note. Jonathan stared at the disc, then at her, eyes narrowed with a shimmer that looked an awful lot like grief. But you always played it alone, he whispered. Her throat tightened. I didn't know how not to. He took the disc. Held it to his chest for a long moment. Then maybe now, you don't have to. 2 years later, Malibu, 2025. Stillness returned. Life, as it does, moved on. She did more films. Spoke at festivals. Walked carpets again. But something had shifted. The velvet chaise long remained. The view still framed the crashing Pacific. But the stereo? Gone. Replaced by a turntable. A new medium. A new beginning. And yet, sometimes, especially on windy days, she would reach for a small, weathered envelope tucked in her record collection. Inside were 3 Polaroids. And a note that came months after she returned from Austria, in red pen, Jonathan's handwriting still so obviously his. If you're not the one, then maybe you're the reason I became one myself. Thank you. For everything. No more CDs. No more longing. Only the music they both carried now, silently, in the marrow of who they'd become. Final thought. Nicole never remarried. Never needed to. She had learned something immeasurable from that single burnt CD, that the heart doesn't ache eternally because it's empty. It aches because it remembers how full it once was. And sometimes, playing a song alone isn't an act of loneliness. It's remembrance. It's giving voice to something that lives on in silence. It's love, unfinished, unforgotten, and still echoing.